So, good morning, everybody. Now, we're ready to get started. Today, we'll be finishing off modifiers. So, there was a little bit left from our previous session on modifiers. And we'll also want to do a little bit of comparisons today. Now, just to quickly revise participles, right? So, participles are important for us. Let's quickly revise. Maybe with just like 2, 3 examples. All right. Now, in this sentence, right, he solved the question. What is solved over there? I mean, what type of word is it? Perfect, it's a verb. Now, in the
Verb.
second one, right, and in the second one, what is solved? What type of word is solved? Guys, remember, you don't have to type this out. You can unmute yourself.
It's part of main verb.
It's part of the verb, right? But what type of word is it?
Past participle.
Perfect. And in the last one, what is it?
It's also participle.
Very good. With one small difference, it is now a past participle modifier, right? So in the first one, solved is a complete verb on its own. In the second one, it is not a complete verb on its own. It is a past participle combining with a helping verb, and together they form an actual verb. And in the last one, it is a past participle modifier. It's not combining with any helping verb. And just to quickly remember, the past participle almost always gives us the passive meaning. All right, so that was for the revision. Now let's come to present participles. Now, in a lot of cases, present participles are tested very directly. So, if you may remember what we discussed about using a logical noun as the subject of the clause that the present participle modifies, right? Today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a few slightly more complicated situations in which participles may be used, right? Now, the first one is that we if you may have heard of this phrase comma ing, right? Now we don't call things comma ings in our classes, but for now at least it helps us see that there must be a comma in whatever we're discussing. So the point we're trying to make over here is when you see this so-called comma ing structure, right, you are almost certainly looking at an adverb. What does that mean? It means that your comma ing will have some sort of logical relationship to the clause before it, right? So let's take an example of this. Now, this is the first example, the Reserve Bank example. Let me just highlight it. Now, let's take a second to read it. The RBI devalued the rupee, comma, leading to a sharp increase in exports. So what you see over here is a comma ing, comma leading, right? And this sort of a structure, when you see comma ing, it's almost certain to be related to the previous clause. So the Reserve Bank of India devalued the rupee, and what was the result of that? It led to a sharp increase in exports. But if you don't have a comma, if you don't have a comma, then most likely your ing will end up acting as an adjective, right? So take a look at the second one. Hang on, we've got 2 examples in the second one. Yeah, let's take the first one. We spent the entire day painting the house. Now over here, what is the verb?
Spent.
Very good. The verb is spent. It is not painting. So, with certain verbs, right, it is completely natural to expect an ing afterwards without any sort of comma, and this will still be an adverb. In fact, I think we discussed the same example in the previous modifier session. We spent the entire day painting the house does not mean that the day was painting the house. It means, we're talking about how we spent the day. So I think this is something we're already familiar with. So let's not press the point too much. The point is that there are certain verbs after which an ing is completely acceptable as an adverb, right? But in other cases, other verbs don't take ings like that. So there are very few verbs that take ings as adverbs, like spent does. Right? If you take a look at the second one, the Reserve Bank example again, it says the Reserve Bank of India devalued the rupee, leading to a sharp increase in exports. Right now, the verb. Okay, let me ask, what is the verb over here?
Devalued.
Perfect, perfect. So the Reserve Bank of India devalued the rupee, leading to a sharp increase in exports. Now, in this sort of a situation, we absolutely need that comma over there. So there is zero chance that this leading is going to act as an adverb. It needs a comma. Uh, in its current form, the sentence actually ends up telling us that the Reserve Bank of India devalued the rupee, leading. That means not only did the rupee lead to a sharp increase in exports, right, which is not the intended meaning, it also means that there is a specific type of rupee. So you may remember what we discussed in terms of restrictive modifiers, non-restrictive modifiers. The point is, this means that there are multiple rupees. There is one rupee which is leading to a sharp increase in exports, and the RBI devalued that particular rupee, which is another meaning problem, right? So many issues with this sentence. Now I see that Ankit and Ujali just joined us. Guys, welcome to the session. Just to quickly recap, so the first part of what we discussed was just like a warm up, identifying participles, exactly the same thing as the previous session. But in today's session, let me just quickly review what we've done till now. We've said that there are these comma ing structures, right? Which we don't normally call them comma ings in our classes, we normally call them participles. But when you see a comma ing, it is most likely going to be an adverb, but there is a small possibility that you may be looking at an adjective. So the word almost has been highlighted over there. I mean, it's in all caps. Comma ings are almost always adverbs. That is, they will most likely make sense with some clause before them. But in a small minority of cases, they may be used as adjectives as well, in which case they will refer to some noun before them. Now, this is possible, but I don't want to overemphasize this point. In most GMAT questions, you are going to see that a comma ing is going to refer to the clause before it. So be aware of the possibility, but let's not make a big deal out of it. Ankit, question?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Actually, you're talking about that after comma ing, it should refer to the some clause before that, right? So some
Right.
clause means that it can refer to the subject also, it can refer to the verb also.
No, so when we say it refers to the clause, we mean the entire clause, not the subject of the clause or the verb of the clause, the whole thing.
Okay, so it should make sense with both subject and verb, right? Both
It
complete
should
clause.
make it should make sense of the clause, yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that is in fact the very next point that I wanted to get to. In certain situations, you're going to see that this comma ing may not make 100%, like it might not be 100% match for the subject of the clause. So remember, okay, so just to take you back to our previous session, we discussed that many people like to call these things adjectives, right? And I totally get that. I'm not saying they're wrong, but it's more useful normally to look at them as adverbs, referring to entire clauses rather than specific subjects. So, for example, if you look at this RBI example itself, right, this third part of this bubble over here. So, situations where the subject is not exactly shared. Take a look at that sentence again. The RBI devalued the rupee, comma, leading to a sharp increase in exports. Now, I've seen some people get confused over here and they say that, oh, but this doesn't make sense for the subject. The RBI is not leading to a sharp increase in exports, right? This is where we need to be a little careful about calling it an adjective. And that's why in our classes, we refer to these things as adverbs. We say that they need to make sense with the entire clause. And as I said, it's up to you what you would decide to call it. I don't really care what you call it as long as you understand what you're doing and what you see in your questions, right? So the point is the sentence is absolutely fine, even though the RBI is not leading to the sharp increase in exports. The devaluation of the rupee by the RBI is leading to the sharp increase in exports, and that is absolutely fine. Quick check, Ankit, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, definitely. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. All right, now for so called perfect participles. So, again, to help you remember what we discussed in the previous session, we discussed two types of participles. We discussed present participles, we discussed past participles. And technically speaking, there are only two types of participles, present and past. But there is also this, slight combination of present and past. It's called a perfect participle. Now, whenever you see the word perfect in English grammar, right, it basically is a reference to the past. It means something that's already over. So, perfect means already done. Uh, anyway, let's take a look at the structure of a perfect participle. A perfect participle looks like this: having, right? Having is an ing, so that's a present participle. Having plus past participle. So that's why we say it's kind of like a combination of present and past. So there's a specific present participle that we're looking at. Which present participle is that? Having. And then having combined with some other past participle. Now, mm, what I would like from you is to take a look at those two sentences, right? So let's take a look at those two examples together and see whether they sound okay or not. Let's take a look at the first one. Having achieved success as an actor, he may choose to become a director. And the second one says, having been admitted. And having been admitted is like three words now. Having plus been plus admitted. Now, the reason you see three words is that you are now in the passive. Take a look at the first one. Having achieved is just having plus past participle, right? Having achieved. It means he is the one who achieved it. But if we say having been admitted, what we're trying to say is she is not admitting, she is getting admitted. So that been over there is not a big problem. It's just an indicator of the passive voice. That's all. There's no other difference. But the point I want to ask is if I say having been admitted to Stanford, Kaya resigned from her job at Apple, does that sound okay or not? Or does it sound weird? That's the question I want to ask. Take your time, go through these. Okay, so Abhishek feels it's okay. Go through the sentences. Ujali's fine with this. Ankit's okay with it. Rahul and Manu's okay. And Rahul. Perfect. So perfect. Now, one last thing. Perfect participle, what do they imply? Something happened before. So whenever we say having achieved, right? In fact, let me do one thing over here. Let me just quickly say that it's most likely going to be a reason. Most likely going to be before with a small element of reason. So, having achieved success as an actor, it basically means that the success has already happened. And most likely, there's like a small element of using that as the reason. Like, because he's already achieved success as an actor, he may do this. Or because she's already been admitted to Stanford, Kaya resigned from a job at Apple, right? So, whenever you see perfect participles, that means something happened before, and there is a small chance that you're also trying to invoke that sense of reason for something. But the main thing is that this happened before. All right. That brings us to absolute phrases. Now, absolute phrases are just another kind of modifier, right? But they are very, very rare in the sense that nobody uses absolute phrases while talking. They are used only in writing, which also means that we're probably not that, let's say, familiar with absolute phrases. And this is the major problem with absolute phrases. Because they're used only in writing and you never encounter them in speech, you most likely will not feel as comfortable with absolute phrases as you would with other types of modifiers. But anyway, that is a whole different story. Let's start with looking at what absolute phrases look like. So first of all, before we even take an example, let's take a look at the structure of an absolute phrase. An absolute phrase is a noun plus modifier, right? Now, if you've revised what we've done till now in our sessions, you might just ask, hey, noun plus modifier, isn't that just a noun phrase? Um, so I could have a noun plus a modifier that could just be a noun phrase because the modifier is for the noun. But absolute phrases are slightly different. We'll talk about how they're different, but basically the structure of an absolute phrase is a noun plus modifier. Now, that modifier can be a lot of things, but I would like you to focus on participles. So, participle is the most likely candidate for that modifier, the modifier that comes after the noun. And I've used the word modifier many times over here. Just to quickly help you remember, a modifier is either an adjective or an adverb. So it's some sort of structure that acts as an adjective or an adverb. It could be a normal adjective or adverb, but it could be another structure that acts as an adjective or adverb. Now, this modifier, when paired with a noun, together forms something called an absolute phrase. And the absolute phrase, the whole thing, is also a modifier, right? That's what we're saying over here. So there are these slightly possibly difficult sounding or weird sounding structures called absolute phrases. They are modifiers. They consist of a noun plus a modifier. Now, let's quickly round off our discussion. That modifier within the absolute phrase could be a participle, could be an adjective, could be an adverb, could be a preposition, could be an infinitive, could be another noun. I don't want you to focus too much on the rest of these. The most important is participles. You may want to be aware that there are a lot of possibilities when it comes to absolute phrases. But remember, the most common is participles. So noun plus participle is the most common one. Now, this is a small discussion we had in one of our earlier sessions. With plus absolute. So, what we discussed is that some people say that with plus absolute is a prepositional phrase, whereas some people say that with plus absolute is another form of an absolute. We absolutely don't care about that debate. It has absolutely no implication for us whatsoever when it comes to the GMAT. The point is that we should understand the meaning of this structure because this structure is common on the GMAT. So, time to get to our examples. I want you to take a look at both these sentences. In fact, I'll read them out for you. And I'd like you to let me know whether they sound okay or not, or whether only the first one sounds okay, only the second one sounds okay, or both of them sound bad. Let's start. Its entire fleet of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft grounded, the airline must focus on cutting costs. The second one is, with its entire fleet of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft grounded, the airline must focus on cutting costs. Take your time. When you're comfortable, let me know. Both okay, one okay, two okay, or both not okay. Okay, I see that I've got 2, 3 responses. Uh, Manu and Ujali, let me know. Otherwise, remember, if you have doubts, you can always. Okay, I see that you've not enabled your microphones, but fair enough. You can always enable and ask your questions. If you have. Okay, fine. We've got responses. So, second, okay. Second, both sound okay. Second sounds better. Second one, perfect. Now, the first one is your normal absolute phrase. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Its entire fleet of Boeing 73 MAX aircraft, right? Now, this whole thing is a noun, all the way up to aircraft. The whole thing is just a noun. And grounded is a past participle. Now, my first question to you is, how do you know that this is a past participle? Maybe it's just a verb. How do you reason your way through that? How do you recognize that you're looking at a past participle?
So it's not an action that is being done.
Excellent. So the word you're looking for is it is not active. Right? Perfect. Now, for example, if I say I grounded them, right? I grounded the aircraft. I grounded the aircraft means I performed the action. That is active voice. Grounded is a verb. But over here, the aircraft are not grounding anything. They are getting grounded. That is, they are passive. And what we've discussed is in the passive meaning, your EDs are past participles. So just keep that in mind. That's a nice way to check whether you're looking at a verb or a participle. All right, so we've established that grounded is a past participle. Good. Its entire fleet of Boeing aircraft grounded, noun plus past participle, comma, the airline must focus on cutting costs. The second one, with its entire fleet of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft grounded, basically the second one is the first one, just with the word with added at the front, right? That's the only difference. And they both mean the same thing, which is what we want to get to now. But before we carry on, now the reason this is important, first of all, let me take a step back. You know, what we discussed in modifiers, the first session, that is much more common. Modifiers is a major topic on the GMAT. It's important. It's important. All of those things are important. What we're discussing right now, absolute phrases are quite uncommon, right? Which is why we didn't include them in the main session. This is not super important for you. But let me tell you when it may become important. So, absolute phrases are structures that are very rare, right? As we've been discussing. Now, because they are rare, sometimes what happens is, not sometimes, in fact, most times what happens is, if that absolute phrase is in the correct option, and most times, when absolute phrases are used, they are in the correct options. Now, when that happens, most people find that those absolute phrases sound very bad. So they remove those options without even thinking about anything, right? Effectively, the bottom line is those questions get classified as high difficulty questions. So the point I'm trying to make over here is when you see an absolute phrase, it is most likely going to be in a high difficulty question, and those high difficulty questions are most likely when you are doing well on your GMAT. So the probability that you'll see an absolute phrase used in an SC question if you're not doing well is quite low, but it increases when you are doing well. That's when it may become important for us when we're taking the GMAT. Now, the very first problem with it is sound, and that's what we try to address. Absolute phrases can sound really bad, right? Or if you are comfortable with them, they actually sound really good, right? Anyway, the point is, even if they sound bad, we must be able to recognize them and not remove them just, on site. That's the first thing we need to watch out for. So let me write that down. Sound. Don't remove something just because it sounds bad unless you're sure that it's wrong. The second one is it is not a comma splice. So many people who are not able to identify past participles, who are not able to differentiate between past participles and verbs, they look at that structure, its entire fleet of Boeing aircraft grounded. They think it is a clause. On the right hand side, they think they have a clause. They have a clause, of course. On the right hand side, we definitely have a clause. The airline must focus, right? That is definitely a clause. And then they think on the left hand side, I've got a clause. On the right hand side, I've got a clause. In the middle, I have only a comma, which is a comma splice. Therefore, let's take that option out. But this is not a comma splice. On the left hand side, we do not have an independent clause. We have something called an absolute phrase. The second thing, I think I've gone through it very fast. I just wanted to check, are we comfortable with this or not? Because we must never assume that an absolute phrase is giving us a comma splice. It is not. So let me just quickly check. Are we comfortable with this? Yes, no, or of course, unmute and ask your doubts. Okay, so
Hello.
I've received only. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Actually, I want you to repeat that test you were talking about. That how to check whether it is a past participle or it is
Right,
an verb.
right, absolutely. So let me take a step back. Do you remember we discussed that your present participles provide you an active meaning? And your past participles almost always provide a passive meaning,
Yeah.
right? Now, let's say you are talking about children, right? And you
Yes.
say, I grounded them, right?
Hmm.
So basically, you told them, hey, look, you can't go out of the house. You got to stay here, got to do your homework, things like that. I grounded them. Now, who's performing the action?
Myself.
Right? I, right?
Yeah.
And what's the subject?
Subject is also I.
Right. Now, when the subject and the doer match, what is that? Active voice?
Yeah.
Now, in the active voice, your EDs are verbs. So, whatever ED you see, right, it will be a verb in the active voice. So, if you see only an ED and you are in the active voice, it is a verb.
Okay.
Okay. But if you see only an ED and it is in the passive meaning,
Hmm.
that'll be a past participle modifier. So, for example, if I say the children grounded by me, the children grounded by me, it doesn't sound like a complete sentence, right?
Hmm.
And the reason for that is grounded is not a verb. It's a past
Hmm.
participle modifier. It is the children are getting grounded. They're not doing the grounding, they are getting grounded by me.
Hmm.
Better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Ujali, over to you.
In the example, its entire fleet,
Hmm.
you said that we shouldn't assume left the LHS to be an independent clause.
Hmm.
Uh, but why will it be an independent clause? It says its entire fleet of Boeing Max aircraft grounded.
Hmm.
It just says it's, but like, who is the it's referring to? If we don't know that, then why will it be independent?
Oh. So this is a slightly different discussion. An independent clause just means a subject plus a verb.
Verb.
That's it. Right. Now, what
Hmm.
form do dependent clauses take? They are subject plus verb combinations, right? With something before them, something like a relative
Hmm.
pronoun or a subordinating conjunction.
Hmm.
Something specific, like what we discussed in our third or fourth session. But over here, what you
But
see
just
is, mhm,
But if the LHS on its own doesn't sound complete
that's
anyway.
the point. No, it sounds complete. What you're saying is logically, it may not be complete. For example, if I say her friend watched a movie with her, full stop,
Hmm.
it
Her friend
sounds
watched a
complete.
movie with her. Yeah.
Sounds complete.
Hmm.
But it's not logically complete because the her is not defined.
Okay.
So, when you think about whether something is an independent clause or not, what you're doing is you are taking a structural call. You're not taking a logical call.
Okay.
So, an independent clause just means it is capable of standing alone as a sentence. That's it.
Right. Right.
Structure.
Right.
Subject is there, verb is there. But what a lot of people do is they look at that grounded and they're unable to see that it's not a verb. That is the problem or the mistake that they make. So they think grounded is a verb and they've got a subject plus verb. They think they have an independent clause, but they don't. And this is something we must watch out for. This is one of the major places where people go wrong with absolute phrases. So the first one is they think the sound is wrong, right? The second place they go wrong is comma splices. So neither of those applies to absolute phrases. Better?
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. So I think Abhishek, Ankit, and Ujali are comfortable with this. Manu and Rahul, can you also Rahul's confirmed? Manu is also confirmed. Excellent. Now let's get to recognizing absolute phrases. So basically, we want to understand what they do. Like, why would you use, or what does an absolute phrase do when you use it, right? Okay. Now, the most important one is to introduce a reason for something. Now, if you analyze this a little bit, or hang on, I think we may have discussed this already. Because is basically an adverb. It gives you the reason for a clause, basically. And that is true for absolute phrases also. All absolute phrases are adverbs, right? And this first use is very important. Absolute phrases are very often used to provide the reason for something. So I want you to look at that Boeing example again. Its entire fleet of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft grounded, the airline must focus on cutting costs. This is basically the same as saying, because its entire fleet was grounded, the airline must focus on cutting costs. It's exactly the same thing. The meaning is exactly the same as saying, because its entire fleet was grounded, the airline must focus on cutting costs. Here's another example. Her friend stuck in traffic, she entered the theater alone. Her friend stuck. This is not a complete thought. To make it complete, you would say her friend was stuck, right? You would never say her friend stuck in traffic, full stop. You would say her friend was stuck in traffic, full stop, right? So her friend stuck in traffic, this is not a complete thought. It's an absolute phrase, comma, she entered the theater alone. What is this trying to tell us? It's trying to tell us that because her husband was stuck in traffic, she entered the theater alone. Now, the important thing to keep in mind over here is your absolute phrase can provide you the reason for something. Because can also provide you the reason for something. There are many ways to provide reasons in English. It's not like, hey, look, only the one word because can provide you a reason in English, right? There are many ways to provide a reason. Now, none of them is, exceptionally different or like significantly better. That is something you can look at on a case by case basis. The point I'm trying to make over here is if you get a choice between because, like an option uses because, an option and another option uses an absolute phrase, you cannot immediately say that let me mark the because option. Because the absolute phrase is also perfectly fine when it comes to providing reasons for something. What you need to do is you need to look for errors elsewhere. Okay, so don't remove the absolute phrase. It may be providing you the reason for something. So keep that in mind. Don't remove it immediately. Check for other errors in those options. As I said, in most cases till now, if there's an absolute phrase, that absolute phrase is in the correct option. But don't count on that. Don't just assume that anytime you see an absolute phrase, it'll be correct. Analyze those options and take the appropriate action over there. Now, quick check. Are we comfortable seeing this sentence, a friend stuck in traffic because a friend was stuck in traffic? Are we comfortable reading it like that? Okay, quick check. Abhishek, Ankit, Ujali, are we comfortable reading it like this? Her husband was stuck in traffic. Her friend stuck in traffic. Because her friend was stuck in traffic, she entered the theater alone.
Sorry, I got disconnected in between, but um,
Right.
what
So let me quickly.
because and the was optional.
Yeah. So what we're basically saying is, whatever you say using an absolute phrase, right? You may be using that absolute phrase to provide a reason for something.
Okay.
And that is exactly the same thing as using a because. So the function or the primary function of an absolute phrase is to provide the reason for something. So her
Okay.
friend stuck in traffic. Her friend was stuck in traffic because her friend was stuck in traffic, right? Both of these mean exactly the same thing,
Okay, yeah.
right? So whether you go with because her friend was stuck in traffic or because her friend, I'm sorry, not okay. Whether you go with her friend stuck in traffic or you go with because her friend was stuck in traffic, both of them mean exactly the same thing, and you can't really decide or choose on that basis. Quick check, better? Ujali, I'm not getting audio in case you can hear me. Okay, hang on. Whenever your audio comes back, we'll resume this discussion. For now, let's take a look at the next one. Absolute phrases can also be used to tell you that something happened um, before something else. So the presentation over, we went out for dinner. The presentation over means the presentation happened before and then something happened after that. So it's like saying after the presentation was over, we went out for dinner. So basically, your absolute phrases can also be used to introduce something that happened before something. And basically, what that means is you are trying to say after this thing happened, the next thing happened. Quick check. Let me know. Is the second one okay? And in the meantime, Ujali, I see you've reconnected. In case you were able to catch the discussion for the previous one, just give me a yes. Otherwise, of course, we can quickly. Okay, perfect. And the last one is an absolute phrase can be used to provide the context for something. Now, context is a very broad term. It basically means that you are describing the subject or something in the environment of the subject at around the same time, right? So, an absolute phrase is not used for something that happened like way back, like 200 years ago. An absolute phrase is used in approximately the same time frame to describe, let's say, the way something was done or the manner in which it was done or the condition of something when that was happening, just to provide a description, right? Description of either the subject or something in the environment, something around the subject in the same time interval. Again, what I've said sounds very complicated, but it's actually, I think this may be easier to see than the other examples. The car did a perfect 360, its tires squealing and its frame shuddering. Now, over here, the absolute phrase is on the right hand side. It's so I think the examples we've taken till now used the absolute phrase on the left hand side of the independent clause. It doesn't matter. It can be on the right hand side, it can be on the left hand side, although left hand side is more common. The point I'm trying to make is the car did a perfect 360 is an independent clause. Its tires squealing and its frame shuddering is a combination of two absolute phrases that are describing something about the car during the time it was doing a perfect 360. Are we comfortable with this sentence? Let me know. Okay, Ankit and Abhishek have confirmed. Rahul, Manu, Ujali. Quick check. Ujali, if you can hear me. Okay, I think we may be facing. Okay, perfect. All right. Now let's come to the last category. The last category is something called appositives. Now you can have
Sorry,
multiple.
sorry,
Yeah,
sorry to
no
interrupt.
problem. No problem. Go
When you
ahead.
said if I caught the last discussion, I didn't know that
Mhm.
we're already discussed when or after. Can we just go over that once, please?
Right, absolutely. So one second. Let me clear the screen up. And let me highlight that sentence. The presentation over, we went out for dinner, right? Now, this is meant to be read as after the presentation was over, we went out for dinner. So basically,
Okay.
it's saying that the presentation was over happened before the going out for dinner. and instead you can just read it as after,
Okay.
right? And this, in fact, brings me to a quick discussion. It may not be relevant for the GMAT, but it is important. An absolute phrase does not clarify the actual relationship between itself and the clause that it modifies. So, to be very clear, when you look at this sentence, the presentation over, we went out for dinner, you have no way of knowing whether the person who is making the statement is trying to introduce a reason or trying to refer to time. So, this sentence can be read either as because the presentation was over, we went out for dinner, or it can be read as after the presentation was over, we went out for dinner. You have no way of understanding or realizing which one it's actually being used to refer to without your own interpretation of the sentence. So, in that sense, using a word like because or after is actually, it leads to more clarity. But I don't want to overemphasize this because it's not a huge problem with absolute phrases. It's okay. A little bit of ambiguity is acceptable. We just need to remember that it cannot be a situation where we're just removing an option with an absolute phrase just because we think, oh, look, there's another option with because. All right. Now let's move to the third one. The last one, appositives. Now, there are different types of appositives, but what is an appositive? An appositive is a modifier that includes just a noun. That's it. There's nothing else. It's just a noun. Let's take a look at some plain appositives. Go ahead, take a look at these two sentences. The leading candidate. When you are ready, let me know. In the first sentence, what is the appositive? Okay, Ankit's given the answer. Yes, it is a Democrat. Now, in case anybody here is wondering whether the leading candidate can be the appositive, because you might be thinking, hey, why can't my noun come before the subject, right? It absolutely can. It can come before the subject. But over here, what you will notice is a Democrat is within commas, like a pair of commas. Now, if we assumed that the leading candidate is the appositive, then what that would mean is a Democrat would be the subject, but a subject cannot have a comma. I mean, you can't use a comma between a subject and its verb if they are right next to each other, right? So, as we've already discussed, if they are right next to each other, you can use a comma only when there is a non essential modifier in between a pair of commas. Otherwise, you never use a comma between a subject and its verb. So, in this one, the appositive is a Democrat, and what the sentence is trying to say is the leading candidate is expected to win the election. So that's the subject verb combination over there. All right. Now, when you're ready, let me know why is the second sentence wrong, please? Yeah. Manu and Ankit, if you're typing out long replies, you could just unmute. It's so much faster. I mean, I'm saying this because I am very slow at typing.
Yeah, actually, the Noma is the three-star Michelin restaurant they're talking about, so it should be right next to that.
Very good. And Manu's also saying the same thing. Perfect. Another way of looking at the same thing is this sentence is wrong because it seems to imply that the food critics are a 3 Michelin star restaurant, right? So that would be a meaning call that we take. And we say that, yeah, this is not the likely meaning. And therefore, it's not a good option for us to mark. Awesome. Now let's go to resumptive modifiers. The name, so resumptive, the name sounds very complicated. It's actually very simple. Now, imagine that you have a noun, right? So, what are appositives? Appositives are basically just nouns. I mean, the modifier is just a noun. So, when you use a noun phrase as a modifier, that is an appositive. And we just took a look at a simple example with appositives. Now, another pattern with appositives is when you use a noun that has already been used earlier in the sentence, right? So, let's take an example. I want you to look at the third sentence over here, the third example. Now, it's really long, so it may take like 10-20 seconds to read it. The regulator announced an investigation into the alleged use of monopoly power in the technology sector to stifle competition, an investigation that was described by critics as an abuse of regulatory power. Now, what you're seeing over here is an appositive after the comma, right? An investigation that was described by critics. Now, what's different about this appositive is it is literally the same word that has been used earlier in the sentence, an investigation. So, when your appositive repeats a word that was used earlier, you have something called a resumptive modifier. The term is not important. What's important is we understand why we see it sometimes in GMAT questions. Why do we use it, or why do we see it, or why does the correct option sometimes use it? Because it helps to bring in clarity. And let me be clear, sometimes options with resumptive modifiers might actually be longer than other options, but they add a significant amount of clarity. If you take a look at the first two, right? The regulator announced an investigation, blah, 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 described by critics as an abuse of regulatory power. Now, over here, what we've done is we've used a past participle. And in the second one, we've used a relative pronoun. Now, all of these are also modifiers, right? Why can't we use them? Well, you can use them, but they are not as clear. It seems as if they are referring to something closer, like which, right? Which is normally very good at referring to something that's very close to it. So, if you want to refer to something far away, it is not, let's say, the ideal choice. It is not wrong, but it's not very nice either. So, sometimes to bring in that additional clarity, the GMAT will use this sort of structure. Quick check. So, let me summarize. These three options, all of them are grammatically correct, but the third one is significantly clearer. So, although the first two have not been marked as red, and I would look for other errors in all my options, I do want you to be comfortable with the fact that the third one is significantly clearer. Quick check. Are we comfortable with this? Okay, I've got a couple of yeses. So, Manu, Rahul, Ujali, quick check. Is this comfortable? I mean, are we comfortable with this? Oh, hang on. I think Ujali is facing connectivity issues. Fair enough. All right. Now let's move to the last one. The last one is imagine, okay, you have an appositive that is not repeating a noun, but it is using a noun that kind of summarizes everything before it, the entire clause before it. Ujali, I see you've reconnected. I see you're facing some issues with the connection. Do you think you might want to look at maybe getting on your phone internet connection, your hotspot maybe?
Yeah, let me
Yeah, even your audio is cutting out. So that most likely means that you're facing connectivity issues. This could happen because your connection's being used by other people, or maybe the Wi-Fi connection, you're sitting far away. It could be anything. But you may want to switch to your phone connection, your mobile tethering or hotspot or whatever it's called, and use that instead. All right. So let's take a look at the last sentence. Tesla stopped accepting Bitcoin as payment for its cars. Now, what's the appositive? It's the one on the right hand side. Clearly, it is not repeating any noun, right? So the noun a move is not there anywhere in the sentence. But what is it trying to do? It's trying to refer to the entire clause before it. This is absolutely fine, and it's very good also at summarizing what the sentence is trying to say. So Tesla stopped accepting Bitcoin as payment for its cars. The whole thing has been summarized by the noun a move that led to a sharp fall in the price of Bitcoin. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with this? Right. And I see that Ujali just rejoined. Ujali, let me just quickly repeat this one. Sometimes the noun, right, that we use to refer back, it may not be literally present in the sentence. We'll just use a different noun to refer to the entire thought. So in the last one, what we're saying is we're using the noun a move to sort of summarize everything before it. So Tesla stopped accepting something, something. The whole thing has been summarized by the noun a move. All right, guys. Now let's take a look at comparisons. Now, comparisons, a very common word for comparisons is like. So, like is a very common way to introduce comparisons. Okay, I see Ujali's rejoined from the mobile device. Fair enough. Ujali, if you can just unmute and confirm, are you able to see the screen? Is it visible? Is the audio okay? Or are we still facing issues? We're still facing issues. Got it. All right, let's continue. Comparisons with like and unlike are used to show similarity or dissimilarity, but they don't invoke equivalence. Let's discuss what this means. If I say that, like his father, he joined the army. Like his father, he joined the army basically means he and his father are similar in some way, but they are not the same person. They are not equivalent, right? So they are different people and they are similar in some way. Basically, over here, what we don't want to do is we don't want to use as his father, he joined his army. He joined the army. Um, we'll discuss this later also, but quick check. Are we comfortable with this? Let me know. Yes, no on this. Like his father is fine, but you can't say as his father. All right. I've received a
No.
few confirmation. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, can you please repeat why ask is not possible?
Right. As would mean that he is his own father. Basically,
Yeah.
as would imply equivalence. Like
Mhm.
shows similarity without saying that they are the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, let's discuss a couple of. Yeah, go ahead. Rahul, please go ahead.
So can we say that it's an absolute rule that like is used for comparison of nouns and as is used for comparison of clauses, functions, roles, etc.
No, no. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. We'll discuss this in our idiom session when we do like versus as. But yeah, we don't want to. Yeah, we should not. We should not stick to that. I
Okay.
mean, it's okay, but it's a little simple.
All right.
Okay. All right. Now, a couple of errors or possible errors, right? Now, like as a conjunction. Mm, like is a conjunction, right? So we've discussed like over here, I think, and this is what Rahul was also trying to get at. When he says like for nouns, right? Basically, what that means is like is used with a noun after it. It's there's a little more to it than that, but at least what we will do in our classes, we'll just say like plus noun or like plus gerund. And why is that? Because we're treating like as a preposition. And we know that prepositions are followed by nouns or gerunds. Now, this is a little debatable, right? But in the past, the GMAT has been consistent about this. The GMAT has consistently said that like for comparison should be a preposition, not a conjunction. Again, that's a very complicated way of putting it. Practically speaking, what does this mean for us? It means you should not use like when there is something after like that is not a noun or a gerund. Let me give you an example. It looks like he's going to win. It looks like he is going to win. After the like, what do we have? We have a pronoun and then we have a verb. Basically, we have a clause. It looks like clause. So we don't have a noun phrase, we don't have a gerund phrase after the like, we have an entire clause. Now, many people think this is okay. I think it's okay. But the GMAT probably doesn't think that it's okay. So it falls into that group of people who think that like cannot be used as a conjunction. They think like should be used as a preposition when it's used to introduce comparisons. So even if it sounds okay to you, I want you to watch out for these types of options. They are almost certainly going to be wrong. It looks like he's going to take the GMAT. If you see, he looks like he's going to win or he's going to take the GMAT. After the word like, if you see anything that's not a noun or a gerund, that option is most likely going to be wrong. You can see the same thing in the next example, like in India. Now, what you could say is like Indian unions in Pakistan, or you could say like those in India, unions in Pakistan, or you could say like Indian unions, Pakistani unions. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to say like in India, because in India is not a noun phrase, it's a prepositional phrase. And after like, what do we want? We want noun phrases. We don't want other things. Quick check, is this okay? Abhishek, no, 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 no. Like in India doesn't fix the problem that we are discussing. After like, we want a noun, right? Again, let me be very clear. A lot of people will not feel that there's a problem with this. As I told you, I don't think there's a problem in your sentence, right? Like when you say like in India, I don't think there's a problem with the first three words. I think it's fine, right? But because every time we've looked at this in official explanations, they have said that like should properly be used as a preposition, not as a conjunction. And they have consistently removed options like the one that you have put up. That is why I'm saying you may see a question mark after there, right? That's because this is going against what my own like instinct is. But I am saying we should override that and treat this as a mistake. Abhishek, is this okay? Perfect. Let me just quickly check. I couldn't quite catch whether everyone's comfortable with this. The rest of us, Ankit, Manu, Rahul, Ujali, are we comfortable with this? Don't put things after like that are not noun phrases. Ujali, go ahead.
So, sorry, I just joined back. So we should be using like as a preposition and not as a conjunction. Is that what you were saying?
Right. So if you see a comparison with like, you should be using it as a preposition and not as a conjunction.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. Now for another famous one, and this is like for examples. So over here, the background to this is when you see a split between like and such as, right? The GMAT is almost certainly going to take the like options out. Almost certainly. At least till now, that's what they've done. But the other part to the background is that there are GMAT questions in which the correct option, in fact, all 5 options use like to introduce examples. So that's quite an interesting point. You may not be aware of this. All 5 options using like to introduce examples on actual GMAT questions. So the way I want you to approach this is if you see a split between like and such as, the like options are almost certainly going to be wrong. But if you don't see a split, right, then you probably don't want to treat this as a major problem. So, like, for example, is commonly accepted in English. We very often say things like apps like Zoom and Slack, right? And in fact, anything like companies like Apple and Microsoft, anything. So we very commonly use like to introduce examples, and the GMAT has also done that in some questions. We should be aware of it. We should not make a big deal out of it in those questions. But if we see a split between like and such as, we're almost certainly being tested on it. All right, quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? All right, I've received a number of yeses over here. Perfect. Okay, now let's look at a very short discussion on ellipses. Now, before we proceed, I just want to be very clear. Ellipsis is a very difficult and vast topic. So ellipsis is just like a huge topic. Firstly, what is ellipsis? Ellipsis means that there are certain parts of the sentence that certain elements that we are just skipping. We don't need to explicitly include them in the sentence. We've already taken a look at some examples of ellipsis, I think around although, around since. So we've done some examples of this, we've seen it before. Now, the difference in our approach is we are being very clear that we are discussing very, isolated instances of ellipsis. In other test prep resources, you might see ellipsis discussed as like a concept. The reason we don't do that is I don't want you to go in thinking that we have discussed everything that there is to discuss about ellipsis. So in a lot of cases, what happens is we read resources that are very incomplete. Like they'll just give you like 1 or 2 pages on ellipsis. Whereas ellipsis, 1 or 2 pages is laughable, right? So I don't want you to go in with the assumption that we have in any way done everything that there is to do in ellipsis, right? I want you to be very aware that we're looking at a very small subset of ellipsis. All right, that said, let's take a look at some patterns. Google's algorithms like Facebook's, right? So what you see over here is you don't have to say like Facebook's algorithms. You can just say Google's algorithms like Facebook's are a closely guarded trade secret. So you don't have to repeat that word algorithms after the possessive noun Facebook's. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with the first one? Okay, I received a few yeses on this. I'm not sure whether Ujali's connection is okay. So for now, let's carry on to the next one. She can't attend the conference, but I can. I don't really have to say she can't attend the conference, but I can attend the conference. So in certain situations, you don't have to provide the entire verb. You can skip a part of the verb. Another example is the Egyptian pyramids are older than the Great Wall of China, and you don't have to write is after that. You don't have to put the entire verb. You can just say the Egyptian pyramids are older than the Great Wall of China, full stop. And in some cases, you can drop the subject and the verb. So you could say, at this time, it's more important to create jobs than control inflation. So it's more important to create jobs than control inflation. You don't have to say it is more important to create jobs than it is important to control inflation. So you can just completely skip the subject and verb. And in fact, even the adjective after that. You just have control inflation and create jobs over there. Again, over here, just be careful. This is absolutely fine. It's absolutely acceptable. We should be aware of this. All right. Now, over here, again, I'm just again going to caution you. Our sessions are usually very comprehensive, right? But I don't want you to assume that this is a complete discussion on ellipsis. As we discussed earlier, please remember ellipsis. I'm not asking you to limit yourself to what we've discussed over here. I've sort of taken a call on your behalf that doing ellipsis in more detail would probably not be a good use of your time. So on that basis, we've kept it limited to a very few issues within ellipsis. We've not looked at ellipsis in any amount of detail. So that is one part of the course that we are not doing in detail. All right. Now let's get to comparisons with as, and then. Now, with as, basically you've got equality. So as is used to show equality. Um, I like to think of it as an X. So if I say he is as tall as his brother, that means their heights are like the same. If I say he's twice as tall as his brother, that's like 2x, right? So he's as tall as his brother is like xx. He is twice as tall is like 2x. He's thrice as tall is 3x. So as is like an x. We shouldn't have a problem with it because this is a very common structure. So that's not an issue. The example over here is the new office building is as large as the previous one. I don't think there's any issue over here. We'd all be comfortable with this sentence. But let's look at possible errors with as, and then. Now, there are some absolute errors. For example, I want you to take a look at the first one. The A320 takes twice as long to fly between New Delhi and Mumbai. Now, I think you would agree that in this sentence, there is nothing to compare this to. So when we say the A320 takes twice as long as what, right? That's the question that's uppermost in our minds. So the comparison here is absolutely incomplete. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with the first one, that it's an absolute error because there's nothing to compare it to? Perfect, I've received some confirmations. Now the second one is illogical comparisons. So the cost of the SLS rocket, which is supposed to launch, I think, today, I'm not sure. The cost of the SLS rocket is expected to be significantly higher than the Starship rocket. Now, what's happening over here? We are comparing the cost of the SLS rocket to the Starship rocket directly. What we should be saying is the cost of the SLS rocket is expected to be significantly higher than the cost of the Starship rocket or the Starship rocket's apostrophe S, so that we have a logical comparison. Quick check, are we comfortable with this or not sure? Okay, one yes. If you have a doubt, please feel free to unmute. You're welcome to ask your questions. Okay, only Abhishek is confirmed. Okay, let me go through this again. The cost of the SLS rocket on one side, right, is expected to be significantly higher than the Starship rocket. This sounds like we're talking about the height of the Starship rocket and the cost of the SLS rocket. So this is completely illogical. We want to compare the cost of both these rockets. We don't want to compare the cost of one rocket to the other rocket directly. So some way or the other, we need to fix that. All right. Oh, and take a look at the last one, the fruit juice example. In fact, let me use this to test whether you guys are comfortable with this. I mean, the sentence is wrong. You can see that it's in red. When you're ready, I'd like you to unmute and tell me why it's wrong.
Sir, hello.
Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. The sentence does not use as many as. It is using wrong word as many than.
Very good. So if you want a second element, right? So let me just say this out properly. If you want a second element with as to introduce a comparison, it cannot be a than. It has to be another as. Similarly, if you want a second element with a word like more or less or greater or bigger or stronger, better, it should be a than. It should not be an as. So the way to fix this sentence would be this amazingly clumsy sentence like this. Contains, of course, over here we'll put fruit juice. Fruit juice contains as many calories as, if not more calories than, finally, cola does, or a can of cola does. So fruit juice contains as many calories as, so now we've got an as on the left hand side, if not more calories than, so we've got a more than, so more has its own than, and the as has its own as. So now everything is finally okay in terms of the comparison. uh of course, you should watch out, like in situations like this, what the GMAT normally goes with, so the correct option will normally say fruit juice contains at least as many calories as cola does. So when we say at least, right, at least captures both ideas, as many and the more idea. So at least is more efficient. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you want to complete a comparison with as with something else, it should not be a than, it should be another as. And similarly, if you do want, sorry, what is this? Ankit, please unmute. Let me understand your question.
Yeah, actually, in this sentence, I'm just seeing if, is the does is the replacement for contains, because
Yes, absolutely.
verb.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, X contains more calories than a can of cola contains calories. This one's okay?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Now let's get to the last one. The last one is so what we were looking at right now, these are level 1 errors. If you see them, you can remove those options immediately. But now let's come to a level 3 error. Just to be clear, some people treat this as a level 1 error, but they are wrong. This is actually a level 3 error. Take a look at this sentence. Now, this is a very famous sort of sentence. I've modified it slightly, but it's a very famous example of this possible error. She likes chocolates more than her husband. Now, before we start, I just want to quickly check, has anybody come across this anywhere and been told that this is wrong? Right. So a couple of us have come across this earlier and seen that people have said that this is wrong on GMAT Club. Right. So over here, let's understand what is happening. Let me give you another sentence first. She is taller than her husband. Now, over here, what you will notice is the verb is, right? She is. Now, is does not take an object, right? So over here, what, in fact, okay, forget using the word object. What type of word is taller? It's an adjective. She is taller than her husband. Now, because is not taking a noun after it, there is no scope for confusion over here. But in the first one, she likes chocolate or chocolates. Chocolates is a noun, and likes is taking that noun as its object. When this happens, there are two possibilities. The last noun that you see over here, it could be the subject of its clause, or it could be the object in its clause. If it is the subject, then the sentence will look like this. She likes chocolate more than her husband likes chocolates. So, husband is the subject. That's one possibility. The other possibility is she likes chocolates more than she likes her husband. So, husband is the object over here. So, she likes X more than she likes Y. Versus X likes chocolates more than Y likes chocolates. So, whenever you end up in a situation like this where the verb is capable of taking an object, then the noun on the right hand side could be acting as the subject or the object. Now, you don't need to remember it quite like this, but the first thing that I want to check is everyone comfortable with the fact that the first sentence, she likes chocolates more than her husband, is capable of being read as either the second or the third one? Okay, I've received 3 confirmations. Rahul, you can unmute and let me know doubts.
Uh, no, sir. I was just. Now I got it, sir.
Perfect. So she likes chocolates more than her husband can be read as she likes chocolates more than she likes her husband, or she likes chocolates more than her husband likes chocolates. Now, let's be very clear. The fact that this can be read in 2 different ways doesn't mean that it's absolutely wrong. It just means that it's ambiguous. And ambiguity for us is a level 3 error. This is not a level 1 error. That is how I want you also to approach this. So just be very careful about this. Other resources might tell you that this is an absolute error on the GMAT. As I said, they are wrong. It is not an absolute error anywhere. It is always just a level 3 error. All right. Now let's wrap up with a couple of points. Any versus any other. Now, this is if I say something like Ajitesh is taller than any student in the class. Probably not true, but still. The sentence is not wrong, but it depends on who Ajitesh is. So, quick check. One possibility is that this is correct. Another possibility is that it's wrong. I want you to tell me when this would be correct and when this would be wrong.
So when Ajitesh is the part of the class, then it is incorrect.
Mhm.
And
Good.
when he is apart from, is not the subset of the class, then it is correct.
Very good. So if Ajitesh is a student, I cannot say Ajitesh is taller than any student in the class, right? Because the set of any student, set of students will include Ajitesh. So if Ajitesh is a student, I cannot say Ajitesh is taller than any student because Ajitesh cannot be taller than himself. But if Ajitesh is not even part of the class, right? Let's say Ajitesh is outside the class or Ajitesh is an instructor, then I can say Ajitesh is taller than any student in the class because the set of students does not include Ajitesh. But if Ajitesh is a student, then I have to say Ajitesh is taller than any other student in the class because the set of other students does not include Ajitesh. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? All right. I've received a few yeses on this. Ujali, quick check. Are we connected? Is the connection stable now?
I
Hello.
we're
Hi,
connected
Ujali.
connected on my phone, so I can't see much, but I'm listening. I don't think
Oh,
it's a
mhm.
problem with my internet. It seems like it's a problem with my laptop.
Oh, okay, okay.
I
All
switched
right.
like 3 connections, and even with my hotspot, it doesn't seem to work on my laptop.
Right. You can stay back after the class. We can cover some of these things. We can go over them
Thank you.
again.
Okay,
In the
thanks.
meantime, Ankit, I think you had a question. Go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
Feel. Mhm.
So what is the difference between I've seen some questions difference between the other and another?
Other and another.
Yeah, there's a
Hmm.
split between others. Like in some question, in one question, as I saw a split between other and another.
I don't think that would be related to a broader concept. I think it would be a very question specific, like you have to look at the context over there and decide which word is correct. So, most likely, you are being asked about an idiomatic situation. I think there was like a GMAT question in which there's some performers at some tribe, like the court of one and the court of another. They perform at the court of one king or something. Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, yeah, I think that was the question.
Yeah, it was something like that. That was an idiomatic decision. We had to take a call on the basis of how that word was used in that context. So that's not a broader thing tested across like let's just a simple split like any versus any other.
Okay.
All right. Now let's take a look at the last one, double
I
possessives.
do have one question though,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
between
Absolutely.
the example we were discussing. So Ajitesh
Mhm.
is taller than any student in the class
Mhm.
is incorrect when the set of students includes you. I mean,
Yes.
includes Ajitesh, but
Yes.
correct when it does not include Ajitesh. So similarly, if we say Ajitesh is taller than any other student in the class, it will be
Mhm.
correct when Ajitesh is a student, but will be incorrect when he is not a student?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. All right. Now for the last one, double possessives. Take a look at the sentence, the music of Bach. Right? The music of Bach is a way to form the possessive. This is like saying Bach's music, right? It's exactly the same. I mean, there's uh, no set difference. In certain cases, we prefer one form over the other, but that's on a case by case basis. Let's come back to the broader point. The broader point is if we say the music of Bach is now more popular than the music of Handel's, right? So this person's music is more popular than the music of, and then we have a possessive. So what's happening over here? This is saying the music of Handel's music, and that cannot be correct. Now take another look at this. What we want to say is the music of X is more popular than the music of Y. We don't want to say the music of X is more popular than the music of Y's apostrophe S. Quick check. Yes, Manu. It's not just redundancy. It's like referring to a whole different thing. So is everyone comfortable with this? Okay. Ojali, not sure?
Not really.
Sure, fair
So
enough. Hmm.
the sentence is music. If it said instead of handles, if it said only handle, then it would be fine.
Yes.
Okay. And sorry, what is the apostrophe to the handles adding?
It means that there is something else belonging to Handel,
Okay.
and the music of that thing which is belonging to Handel,
Hmm.
right? But it's not the music of something belonging to Handel. It's directly the music of Handel,
Hmm.
right? That's the problem. So over here, the double possessive would be wrong.
Okay.
Okay, we just need one level of possessive over here. Something belonging to Bach is more popular than the something belonging to Handel.
Hmm.
But if we introduce a double possessive, it'll mean something belonging to Handel,
Yeah.
right? Perfect. All right, so let's pause at this point.